The Republican Party is in panic mode, and not for the reasons you might think. If you're like me, when you hear that, your brain probably immediately goes, oh no, what did Trump say now?
Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine.
Any Jewish person that votes for her should have their head examined.
Or maybe even, what lie did J.D. Vance come up with now?
And I would just ask that, did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future.
That is a damning non-answer.
Kidding on that last one, of course. We all know J.D. Vance doesn't exactly move the needle or get people excited the way he does when he sees a particularly voluptuous couch. But interestingly enough, folks, the major problem the Republican Party is facing has very little to do with either of them. At least on the surface. Because a bombshell political report has unearthed a telling and concerning last-minute shift in strategy for the Republican Party in their upcoming election bids that bodes extremely well for Democrats while exposing the dire straits that Republicans are in. And on the surface, it has to do with something incredibly important to any political campaign, and maybe Trump's only true love: money.
Money, money, money.
My whole life I've been greedy, greedy, greedy.
And specifically, the amount of money available in the political campaigns of Republican senators. The short story is, there simply isn't enough of it, especially when compared to Democrats. But the long story is a lot more interesting and humiliating for Republicans. Because despite a very strong start for Biden and many a successful fundraiser, only a few months ago, Trump was actually surpassing him in campaign donations.
New FEC filings show in May, Biden and the Democratic Party pulled in $85 million. That's an amount dwarfed by Donald Trump and the RNC, who posted a massive $141 million haul, much of that raised in the aftermath of his criminal conviction.
And then a funny thing happened.
And a huge bump for Vice President Harris. Her campaign says her speech at the DNC sparked a massive surge in donations. More than $40 million were raised since Thursday, combined more than $500 million since President Biden dropped out July 21st. And for the campaign, for Trump's campaign, it raised almost $139 million in July.
And as much as we rightfully put an emphasis on who we are voting in as president and vice president of this country, it is worth getting a bit more granular because there are so many races for the House and the Senate that the mainstream media often fails to cover adequately, but that arguably will have a much more significant impact on the day-to-day lives of Americans. These races and the people running to fill their positions will heavily impact the future functioning of our government and, frankly, the existence of our democracy. And we've already seen what Republican leadership has done for this country.
One thing, I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, that I can go campaign on and say we did. One. Anybody sitting in the complex, if you want to come down to the floor and come explain to me one material, meaningful, significant thing the Republican majority has done.
And while it is true that folks at the top of the ticket can influence voters by endorsing certain candidates, though that can sometimes be more of a curse than a gift on the Republican side.
Today, a defiant Mark Robinson is on the campaign trail following an exodus of staffers. The controversial Republican nominee for governor of North Carolina is holding campaign events just one day after key campaign officials resigned following a bombshell CNN report. And that report unearthed racist and inflammatory comments Robinson made on a forum.
Something far more powerful than that is the cash in each candidate's war chest that allows them to run advertisements and get their faces in front of people who, for the most part, don't know who the f they are.
Kamala Harris believes illegal immigration is not a crime.
We're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
Kamala Harris created the worst border crisis in American history, and John Tester rubber-stamped her liberal policies, supporting taxpayer benefits for illegal immigrants. John Tester and Kamala Harris are weak on illegal immigration.
I'm Tim Sheehy, and I approve this message.
Now, you may have noticed something a little off with that ad, and if you didn't think about it, we'll come back to it in a second, because it isn't just semi-no-name senators that are struggling with this problem. In fact, Republicans have been dealing with this for a while, including those with name recognition. A perfect example of this is Texas's least favorite politician and man with a raccoon on his chin, Ted Cruz, who just a couple days ago went on Newsmax begging for campaign donations because he's being outspent by his Democratic opponent.
And the Democrats are spending over $100 million. Chuck Schumer and George Soros are flooding cash into the state of Texas. They are coming after me with everything they got. My opponent, who is an extreme left-wing Democrat, is a congressman named Colin Allred, and yet he's been on TV for 3 months straight with relentless attack ads. I just went on TV a couple of weeks ago. And so I want to encourage your viewers this morning. I need your help. Please go to tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, and contribute, because we are getting swamped by Chuck Schumer and George Soros.
And here is where things get really interesting. Because Politico reports that the GOP has had to make a sudden and drastic change in their ad strategy amid a major cash crunch. Senate Republicans' campaign arm is making a last-minute shift in its TV advertising strategy in the face of a growing spending disparity with Democrats in key races. And the National Republican Senatorial Committee is canceling all its remaining independent expenditure buys and redirecting that money toward hybrid ads, which are purchased in conjunction with the candidate's campaign at a lower TV ad rate so that the NRSC's money can be spent more efficiently. But those hybrid ads come with a catch. Hybrid ads must spend as much time addressing a national issue or party as they do the specific Senate or House race, which can make the ads clunky and difficult to design. Here, for example, is another horribly clunky hybrid ad from the NRSC and Arizona GOP Senate nominee and queen of conservative Karenism, Kari Lake.
Kamala Inflation Act created record inflation. Ruben Gallego voted for it without question. Then joined Democrats in sending our taxes to fund illegal migrants. Gallego and Harris, 2 mistakes we can't afford again.
I'm Kari Lake and I approve this message.
I mean, I'm no copyright expert, but that's a pretty ad. And the move to shift to these ads comes as Republican candidates have faced significant gaps on the airwaves. While the NRSC and its Democratic counterpart, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, had similar amounts in their campaign bank accounts at the end of August, Democratic candidates outraised their Republican opponents and have been outspending them in key races across the country, forcing Republicans to have to shift to the cheap strategy. Because being able to air hybrid ads at candidate rates can be far cheaper than the independent expenditure rates. In some places, it costs 25 times more for an outside group to air an ad than it would for a candidate, and therefore, Senate and House Republicans have openly sounded the alarm on their fundraising disparity, and the executive director at the NRSC warned that if they didn't close the gap soon, the party would lose winnable Senate races. And that is huge for an election that is still somehow so razor thin. And frankly, I could not think of a more hilarious way for these Republicans to deservedly lose their elections. They don't do anything for the American people, and their policies are absolute garbage, and thus they aren't able to out-fundraise their opponents, and then they get stuck buying dirt cheap and dirt quality ads that come off worse than they do themselves. And look, I'm all for getting money out of politics, but that right there is priceless. Thanks for watching, folks. For Really American, I'm Kenny Hesse, and I'll see you all in the next one.